Welcome to Mystery-fying. I know you're here to drift off to sleep, but before you do, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what scares you the most. Let's dive into tonight's chilling tales. Mystery-fying. They always told us never to wander into the woods after dark, but curiosity can be louder than reason, and that night it was deafening. It started with the sound of footsteps. I was camping alone in the forests, something I had done countless times before. The rustling leaves and crackling fire were familiar companions, but that night there was something different. The woods were too quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a deer or some small animal scurrying about. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I tried to focus on the warmth of the fire and the stars above, but the unease grew stronger. But then, I saw it. A shadow, just at the edge of the firelight, moving between the trees. It was tall and unnaturally thin, almost blending with the darkness. My heart pounded as I stood frozen, unable to look away. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no answer, just the sound of the shadow moving closer. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the trees. The beam of light pierced the darkness, revealing nothing but empty woods. I laughed nervously, convincing myself it was a trick of my imagination. But then, I heard a low growl, deep and guttural, like nothing I'd ever heard before. The growl turned into a whisper, a raspy voice that seemed to come from all directions at once. "Leave." It hissed. Panic took over, and I stumbled backward, tripping over a log. The fire crackled louder as if mocking me, and I could feel the heat against my skin. I scrambled to my feet and bolted toward my tent, fumbling with the zipper to grab my phone. My fingers trembled as I tried to dial for help, but there was no signal. The whispering grew louder, surrounding me, suffocating me. But then, the shadow stepped into the light. It had no face, just a void where features should have been. Its elongated limbs moved in unnatural ways, and its presence seemed to suck the warmth from the air. I backed away slowly, my legs threatening to give out beneath me. "I don't belong here," I whispered to myself, as if the words could protect me. The shadow tilted its head, almost as if mocking my fear. Then, without warning, it lunged toward me. I ran. Branches clawed at my skin as I tore through the forest, not caring which direction I went as long as it was away. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my legs burned with the effort. But no matter how fast I ran, the shadow was always just behind me, its presence like a weight pressing down on my soul. But then, the forest opened up, and I found myself standing in a clearing bathed in moonlight. The whispers stopped, and for a moment there was silence. I dared to look back, and the shadow was gone. I collapsed to the ground, tears streaming down my face. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As I caught my breath, I noticed something strange. The trees around the clearing seemed to shift and move, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. I stood up, my legs trembling, and turned to leave. But the path I had come from was gone. The forest had swallowed it whole. And then, I heard the whisper again, soft and mocking. "You can never leave." Some places don't want to be found, and when you find them, they make sure you never leave. It all started when I moved into the old apartment downtown. The building was ancient, creaking floorboards, cracked plaster, and an unsettling aura that clung to its walls. The landlord gave me the key with a warning: "Don't go poking around where you don't belong." I laughed it off, assuming he meant the leaky pipes or the rickety elevator. My first week there was uneventful. The neighbors were quiet, the rent was cheap, and the location was perfect. But one night, as I was unpacking a box of books, I noticed something strange. A draft. Cold air seeped from the corner of my living room. I traced the draft to the wall behind my bookshelf. But then I saw it. A faint outline of a door hidden beneath layers of faded wallpaper. My curiosity burned brighter than my caution. Armed with a pocket knife and sheer determination, I peeled away the wallpaper to reveal a heavy wooden door. There was no lock, no handle, just a worn brass keyhole. I crouched down, peering inside, and saw nothing but darkness. A chill ran down my spine as the air grew colder. I hesitated, debating whether to leave it alone. But then I remembered the old skeleton key I found in the kitchen drawer earlier that week. I slid the key into the keyhole. It fit perfectly. But then, the moment I turned it, the lights flickered and the air became thick, almost suffocating. The door creaked open, revealing a room bathed in dim, flickering light. It was small and empty, save for a single chair in the center. The walls were covered in strange, swirling symbols that seemed to shift when I looked at them too long. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind me, plunging the room into darkness. My phone flashlight flickered on as I frantically turned, trying to open the door again, but it wouldn't budge. The air grew colder, and the symbols on the walls began to glow faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Then I heard it, a soft whisper, like a chorus of voices just out of reach. "Stay," they murmured, the word reverberating through my chest. But then, the chair in the center of the room moved, scraping loudly against the floor. I froze as a shadow began to form in the seat, growing darker and more defined. It wasn't a person, not exactly. Its shape was wrong, distorted, as if it didn't belong in this world. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice shaking. The shadow didn't answer. Instead, the symbols on the walls flared to life, casting an eerie glow that illuminated the figure. It raised an arm, long and impossibly thin, and pointed directly at me. Suddenly, the door flew open, and I stumbled backward into my apartment. The moment I crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut again, sealing itself as if it had never been there. My bookshelf toppled over, scattering books across the floor. I sat there for hours, staring at the wall where the door had been. It was gone, replaced by smooth, unbroken plaster, but the cold draft remained, and the whispers didn't stop. That was 3 nights ago. Since then, the whispers have grown louder. They follow me everywhere, to the shower, to my bed, even to work. And last night, I woke to find the door was back, its faint outline taunting me in the moonlight. I don't know what's on the other side, and I don't want to find out. But the whispers are relentless, and the draft is colder than ever. They're waiting for me to open it again. And I'm afraid that next time, I won't be able to resist. The fog doesn't just hide things, it reveals what shouldn't be seen. It was a cold, damp evening when the fog rolled in thicker than I'd ever seen before. I was driving home from a friend's house, taking the back roads to avoid traffic. The headlights of my car barely cut through the dense white curtain that swallowed the world around me. The silence was deafening, broken only by the low hum of the engine. The road twisted and turned, unfamiliar, despite having driven it countless times. I should have been home by now, but the fog made everything feel distorted, wrong. That's when I saw it. A figure standing by the side of the road, illuminated briefly by my headlights. They were tall and still, wrapped in a long coat, their face obscured by the fog. I slowed the car, instinctively glancing back in my rearview mirror. But then, they were gone. My stomach churned as unease crept into my mind. I shook it off, blaming exhaustion, and pressed on. But a few minutes later, I saw them again, standing in the middle of the road this time. I slammed on the brakes, my tires screeching against the pavement. My heart pounded as I stared ahead. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there, its face hidden by the shadow of its hat. I rolled down my window, my voice trembling. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The figure didn't respond, but then it tilted its head, slowly, unnaturally, like a puppet on strings. The gesture sent a chill racing down my spine. I didn't wait for an answer. I reversed the car, intending to find another way home. The road stretched endlessly as I tried to retrace my route, but the fog seemed to thicken with every turn. My GPS lost signal, and my phone battery was dying. Panic set in as I realized I was hopelessly lost. That's when I saw it again. The same figure, this time standing on the shoulder of the road, its head still tilted. My blood ran cold as I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Its feet didn't touch the ground. I pressed the accelerator, speeding past it, refusing to look back. The fog seemed to close in around me, and the car's engine groaned under the strain. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white, as I whispered to myself, "It's not real. It's not real." But then, the figure appeared directly in front of me, closer than ever. I swerved hard, the car veering off the road and into a ditch. My head slammed against the steering wheel, and darkness swallowed me whole. When I came to, the car was silent, the air still heavy with fog. I climbed out, my legs trembling, and scanned the eerie white void around me. The figure was nowhere to be seen. I stumbled through the fog, searching for any sign of civilization, my breath visible in the frigid air. But the deeper I went, the more I felt it, the weight of eyes watching me. Whispers echoed faintly, just beyond the edge of hearing, like a distant wind calling my name. And then I saw them, not one, but dozens of figures emerging from the fog. Their heads tilted in unison, their hollow faces turned toward me. My legs refused to move, and I could only watch as they closed the distance, surrounding me in a circle of silence. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The last thing I remember was the cold, skeletal hand of the closest figure reaching toward me, and then everything went black. I woke up in my car, the morning sun cutting through the remnants of the fog. The road ahead was clear, and everything looked normal. But I wasn't the same. Even now, in the safety of my home, I see them in the corners of my vision, faceless figures, watching me from the shadows, waiting for the fog to return. Some sounds can be ignored, but others demand to be heard. When I moved into the old farmhouse, it was supposed to be a fresh start. The place was cheap, too cheap. The realtor had said something about the previous owner leaving suddenly, but I didn't press for details. I just needed somewhere to call home. The first few nights were uneventful. The house groaned with age, and the wind howled through the cracks in the windows. I chalked it all up to the quirks of an old building, but on the fourth night I heard it. A faint whispering. It started just as I was drifting off to sleep, a soft murmur that seemed to come from beneath the floorboards. I froze, straining to listen. It was so faint I could barely make out the words, if they were words at all. But then, who's speaking? I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the unease. I convinced myself it was the wind or the creaking of the wood, and eventually I fell asleep. The next night it happened again. This time the whispers were louder. I pressed my ear to the floor, my pulse quickening. The sound was clearer now, almost like a conversation, though I couldn't understand the language. It was guttural, rhythmic, alien. I told myself I was imagining things, but the whispers wouldn't stop. Every night they grew louder, more insistent. During the day, I tried to ignore the creeping dread that settled in my chest. But then, I found something. While cleaning out the basement, I discovered a trapdoor hidden beneath a pile of rotting wood. It was old and heavy, the iron hinges rusted with age. My gut screamed at me to leave it alone, but the whispers seemed to call me closer, urging me to open it. With a deep breath, I pried the door open. A narrow tunnel stretched into the darkness, the air heavy with damp earth and decay. I shone my flashlight down, but the beam barely penetrated the gloom. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing back to me. But then, the whispers stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the noise. It pressed down on me, thick and suffocating. I should have walked away, closed the trapdoor, and never looked back, but something compelled me to climb down. The tunnel walls were lined with strange symbols, carved deep into the stone. The air grew colder with every step, and the darkness seemed to close in around me. The whispers returned, louder now, surrounding me, coming from every direction. I turned a corner and froze. There, in the center of a small chamber, was a circle of stones, and in the middle, something moved. It was hunched over, its body twisted and unnatural, its skin pale and stretched tight over sharp bones. It turned slowly, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. A wide, jagged grin split its face, and its mouth moved in time with the whispers. I stumbled backward, my flashlight flickering as fear gripped me. The thing took a step toward me, its movements jerky and wrong. The whispers grew deafening, pounding in my skull. But then, it spoke. Not in whispers, but in a voice clear and cold. "You shouldn't have come." I ran. The tunnel seemed endless, the walls closing in, the whispers chasing me. When I finally reached the trapdoor, I slammed it shut and pushed the heaviest furniture I could find on top of it. I didn't sleep that night. The whispers were gone, but the silence was worse. The next morning, I packed my things and left the farmhouse for good. But now, even miles away, I hear it sometimes, faint whispers just beneath the floorboards, calling my name. And I know one day they'll find me again. Some doors are meant to stay closed, but what if they open for you? The first time it happened, I thought it was a draft. I was unpacking boxes in my new apartment, an old brick building on the edge of town. The place was charming, with its creaky wooden floors and tall windows, but it had an unsettling vibe I couldn't shake. That night, as I settled in, I heard it. The faint creak of a door opening. I froze, clutching the mug of tea in my hands. Slowly, I walked down the hall and found the closet door ajar. "Odd," I murmured, pushing it shut. But then, it happened again the next night. This time, I was in bed, reading a book. I heard the same low creak. My heart pounded as I tiptoed into the hallway. The closet door stood wide open, the darkness inside it yawning like a void. I shut it harder this time, making sure it latched. I even wedged a chair under the doorknob. "Let's see you open now," I muttered, trying to convince myself I wasn't scared. The next morning, the chair was across the room, and the door was wide open again. For days, it became a routine. I would close the door, sometimes stacking heavy items against it, and yet every night it opened. The air around it was always cold, and sometimes I swore I could hear faint whispers when I stood near it. But then, I made the mistake of looking inside. It wasn't empty. I mean, it should have been. It was just a small coat closet. But when I opened the door, the space inside seemed impossibly deep. Far deeper than it should have been. The walls seemed to stretch endlessly into shadow, and there was something moving back there, something I couldn't quite see. I slammed the door shut and backed away, my breath hitching. That night, I barricaded it again, but sleep was impossible. The air felt heavy, like the entire apartment was holding its breath. At 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of the door creaking open. This time I didn't get up. I stayed in bed, clutching the covers, praying it would stop. But then, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the hall. I wanted to scream, but fear kept my voice locked in my throat. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just outside my bedroom door. Silence. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, I couldn't tell. Then, a soft knock. 3 gentle taps, as if whatever was on the other side wanted to come in. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The knocking stopped, replaced by a low, raspy whisper. "Let me in." I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke, the closet door was shut again. Everything seemed normal, except for one thing. A handprint on the inside of my bedroom door. It was smudged, almost human, but wrong. Too long, too thin, with fingers that curved in unnatural angles. I've stopped trying to shut the closet door now. Whatever's in there wants it open. And I don't want to know what happens if I fight it. But every night I can feel it, watching me from the shadows. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I hear it whispering. It doesn't need me to let it in anymore. It's already here. They told me to stay away from the well, but curiosity has its own gravity. The farmhouse I inherited from my grandparents was a relic of a bygone era, tucked deep in the countryside where the nights were silent and the stars shone like fireflies. It was a beautiful place, but there was one feature everyone avoided: the old stone well at the edge of the property. Grandma used to warn me as a kid, don't play near the well. It's not safe. I'd assumed she meant the risk of falling in, but the way her voice trembled when she said it hinted at something more. Now, years later, as I walked the overgrown path to the well, I understood why. The air grew colder the closer I got, the birds fell silent, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The well stood like a sentinel, its stones darkened by time and moss. I shouldn't have leaned over the edge. But then, I did. Peering into the well, I saw nothing but darkness. It wasn't the kind of darkness you'd expect. It felt alive, swirling faintly like ink in water. A faint sound reached my ears, a whisper, too soft to make out but unmistakably there. I dropped a small rock down the well, waiting for the splash. But there was no sound, just more whispers, growing louder. That night, I couldn't sleep. The whispers followed me back to the house, lingering just on the edge of hearing. I told myself it was the wind, the old pipes, anything but the well. But then, the dreams began. In them, I stood by the well, unable to move. A shadow rose from its depths, not a person but something far worse. It had no face, only a shifting void where features should have been, and its long, spindly arms reached for me. Every morning, I woke drenched in sweat, the whispers still faintly echoing in my ears. The shadow began to haunt more than my dreams. I'd catch glimpses of it in the corners of my vision, watching me from the tree line or standing in the hall when I turned a corner. One night, I woke to find the front door wide open. My heart raced as I grabbed a flashlight and followed the trail of dirt leading out to the well. It was waiting for me. The shadow stood at the edge, impossibly tall, its arms hanging like dead branches, its head tilted toward me, and though it had no eyes, I felt its gaze pierce through me. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The whispers rose to a deafening chorus, each word indistinguishable yet maddeningly familiar. The shadow raised one long arm and pointed at the well. I don't know why I stepped closer. Maybe it was the whispers, or maybe the shadow had a pull I couldn't resist. As I reached the edge, I felt the ground beneath me give way, and I tumbled forward, my scream swallowed by the darkness. But then, I woke up. I was in bed, the morning sun streaming through the curtains. Everything seemed normal, except for one thing: the dirt on my feet and the faint whisper that still lingered in the room. The well is still there, and so is the shadow. I see it every night now, closer each time. It doesn't need to whisper anymore. I think it's waiting for me to come back, or maybe it's waiting to come inside. Never follow the light, no matter how much it calls to you. The night was heavy with fog, the kind that clings to your skin and muffles every sound. I was driving back from my parents' place, the back road stretching endlessly through the forest. My phone had lost signal hours ago, and the GPS was useless. That's when I saw the light. At first, I thought it was a firefly, hovering just above the tree line. But as I drove closer, it became clear. It was a lantern, bobbing gently in the dark. Someone was walking along the side of the road. Strange place for a stroll, I muttered, slowing the car. The figure holding the lantern was draped in an old-fashioned cloak, the hood pulled low over their face. I couldn't see their features, just the soft, golden glow of the lantern. Against my better judgment, I rolled down the window. "Hey, do you need help?" The figure stopped and turned toward me, but they didn't answer. The lantern's light swayed, brighter now, almost hypnotic. But then, the figure stepped into the woods. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled over and grabbed my flashlight, calling out as I followed the light. "Hey, wait, are you okay?" The lantern bobbed deeper into the forest, weaving through the trees like it was leading me somewhere. The farther I went, the more the fog thickened, swallowing the world around me. My flashlight barely pierced the gloom, but the lantern's glow remained steady, always just out of reach. "Stop," I shouted, frustration creeping into my voice. But then, I realized something. There were no footsteps, no crunch of leaves, no snap of twigs, only the sound of my own labored breathing. Panic set in, but when I turned to head back, I couldn't find the road. The fog had erased my tracks, and the forest seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The lantern flickered ahead, brighter now, beckoning. I didn't want to follow, but what choice did I have? The forest grew quieter as I pressed on, the lantern's glow leading me to a clearing. In the center stood an old, crumbling house. The windows were shattered, the roof sagging, but the lantern's light danced just beyond the open doorway. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. The lantern disappeared inside. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I stepped through the threshold. The air inside was thick and cold, and the smell of damp earth filled my nose. The house was empty, save for a single chair in the center of the room. The lantern sat on the chair, its glow dimming. But then, I heard it. A low, rasping breath came from behind me. Slowly I turned, and there it was. The figure from the road, its hood now pushed back to reveal a face I wish I could forget. The skin was pale and stretched tight over a skeletal frame, the eyes sunken and glowing faintly like dying embers. Its mouth didn't move, but I heard its voice clear as day. "You shouldn't have followed." I stumbled back, my flashlight clattering to the floor. The lantern's glow flared bright, blinding me, and in that moment the figure lunged. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the roadside, the morning sun warming my face. My car was parked a few feet away, the door still open. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding, and looked around. The forest was silent, and there was no sign of the lantern or the figure. But when I opened my car door, a single, burnt-out wick lay on the driver's seat. I don't drive those roads at night anymore, but sometimes in the distance, I see the glow of a lantern, waiting for its next traveler.